all
We are
likelihood, we're
live.
talking about this for an hour, right? Not
Yeah.
fighting you too. You might hear me yell at my dogs, by the way. Um, the Are we really gonna try to do the second episode?
Yes. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm perfectly fine with just seeing after this.
Okay.
I've had a long weekend, so to stay up
I
late.
have a pretty busy week in front of me, and I have stuff, but I'm just
I
not
just wanted.
sure.
I just wanted
I
to
think
get
we need to
ahead of it.
organize it.
Yeah, and I just right. I do too. I think that it might be better if we spend more time and do it right. But I want to at some point, and I don't care when it is, but that's why I keep pushing it. Is at some point I want to start recording 2 episodes. Maybe not every single time, but start getting ahead of it just so we can have a more predictable schedule. Just so we can
Yeah,
release them
I
every
definitely think when we
Friday
do
or whatever it is.
like the ASP.NET stuff or something that's related, it'll be much easier to do it.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I don't see. I don't know. I don't really agree. I guess I don't. We may not be have as much time to do as in-depth research for each one. I definitely agree with, but for stuff like TypeScript, I mean, I guess if you haven't been using it, you didn't do the research. But stuff like this, the Connect response shows, just like see what came out and just kind of gauge your
Yeah.
responses and just sit down. That's why I wanted. That's why I
Yeah,
was like jumping on tonight to do it because I just wanted to knock this one out. This is basically
Yeah.
a
yeah. No, no.
no-brainer,
This is
and
definitely.
then get
We
into
don't
the
want to
one
wait a
that
week
we
because
were.
then it'd be less important.
Yeah. Oh
So,
yeah, that too.
All right.
Right. We need to be timely. Okay,
I
cool.
just wanted
We're
to
ready
make
to
sure.
So are you
go.
gonna kind of run down the agenda, Jess,
What do you mean?
to what we're focusing on, like we kind of tried to do last time? In other words, you're gonna run down the agenda.
I'm gonna moderate. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
moderate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That too. That's a nice.
Yeah.
I think
All
that was
right,
the
cool.
question you wanted to ask.
Are we ready to record?
Sure.
I think so.
All right. Ready? All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void podcast. I'm Jess Chadwick,
I'm Todd Snyder.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
and we are your hosts. We're recording this on the evening of November 22nd, 2015, just a few days after Microsoft's big Connect event that was hosted in New York City and streamed live online. In that event, Microsoft delivered a bunch of news about ASP.NET, Azure, TFS, Visual Studio, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And in this episode of the podcast, we're going to be sharing our reactions to these announcements, and we're going to talk about how they might affect us as developers. If you missed it, the whole event is actually recorded, and the videos are still available on Channel 9, and we'll link to everything in the show notes. So with that, let's just kick it off. So we're not necessarily going to really go in order of the event. We're really just going to kind of pick out stuff that we wanted to really talk about. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, the first thing that was kind of interesting to me was the Visual Studio. Well, first of all, that the fact that the term Visual Studio is apparently incredibly overloaded these days. And so I wanted to very first talk about the
Understatement.
Visual Studio that we all know and love, which is, the thing that runs on Windows and the thing that we've all been developing in for basically as long as we've been developers, short of, the past year or so when these new things have come out. So I'm going to call it now Visual Studio Native. This is my nickname for this, just to
Okay.
differentiate it from all this other stuff. So
Yes,
You know,
and
this is
You mean the big
Visual
fat IDE, right?
the big fat IDE that still has what is it? It has COM in it. It's got a WPF front end and everything. Yeah, it's got C++. It's got COM. It's got
You
all
can
this
file
legacy
your Project
stuff.
Silverlight. Come on.
Exactly. That's
Yes,
the
you
one
can.
I want to start with, right? Because that's the one we all know and love. But that's what we work in every single day. And so I guess the big news there is that that is going to get an update at the end of this month, at the end of November. Visual Studio 2015 Update 1. And I know, Chris, you were excited about a couple of things that were coming out in that update. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. One of the things that I think is tough is it's a lot of bug fixes. There's like little adjustments to tooling. There were a couple cool things, though. The C# interactive window went away. And again, that window wasn't always the most super useful thing. Like, it kind of worked sometimes, and it helped you do some things. And if you ever played around with F# at all, you would get jealous because the F# interactive window was a REPL, which is just the fancy term for read evaluate print loop, which is just a fancy term for I can write code in this window, and it takes effect in the environment. And so that's coming to C# in update 1. It's something I think that folks have sort of complained about for a while, like why doesn't C# have a REPL? And there is a pretty good video that we'll link to that gives a fairly interesting demonstration where one of the reasons you might want to use a REPL or use like an interactive window in this way is you can experiment with APIs without having to do kind of the workflow of write a WinForms app and bring in the reference, whether it's NuGet or otherwise, and then play with the code and then run and run. This way you could just sort of play with it.
Yep.
And
I find myself in that position all the time where I'm like, I just want to run like 3 lines of code, and I got to build a project to do that.
Right. So you can reduce some friction here, and I think it'll be something that's foreign to a lot of Visual Studio developers, but I really do encourage, if there's one thing you take a look at when Update 1 comes out and you get it installed, is that's something you can start using right away. So I thought that was pretty good. I mean, there's other enhancements to the mobile dev tools and Node.js tools and the Python tools and so on, but those enhancements are coming fast and furious anyway. So that's the one I really zeroed in on in Update 1. And that's not to say that's the only thing in the update. Just that's one thing I really zeroed in on.
Yeah, cool.
It sounds a lot like what you get like if you work with Chrome and stuff, being able to type in the APIs and like interact with the environment without, like you said, Jess, having to create a class just to be able to test something real quick.
Yep.
So this looks promising.
Yep. It's kind of been a long time coming, I think.
So also in there, they talked a lot about C#7, which is the first time I've really ever heard about it. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I mean, C#7, it's being discussed and designed in the open on GitHub, like everything else Microsoft seems to be doing, right? And you can interact with Mads Torgensen and the team right there and say, hey, I like this, I don't like this. And it just did the short demo we saw at Connect. The really short demo was, here's a quick feature of C#7, a quick demonstration of pattern matching coming to the language, a concept that's common in functional languages like Elixir, Haskell, F#. And it's the idea is to writing more concise code that sort of you look at later and say, oh, okay, I know what this is doing, instead of having to decode it in your head again, you know?
Yep.
So it's an interesting little demo. It was quick. It was all of like a minute, right?
Oh, and so to be clear, that's not coming out in Update 1, right?
No.
This is Visual Studio.
That's down the line somewhere.
Yeah, the next version of Visual Studio. Did they show anything else in that? I didn't see if they showed anything else.
They showed a couple very quick demos. They're really hard to see them. There was one that was kind of interesting. They talked about the pattern matching with switch statements, and in the switch statement they showed a when, and I'm like, what is that? And then it was gone. I'm like, why did you even show me that? You kind of, it's like you did a quick demo. Right. I think the important thing is that they're following the same suit they do with ASP.NET, which is it's all open source. They're adding a lot of features. Things will get added and not added. But as a developer, it means that I can contribute to this, or I can give feedback. It's more open. It also, to me, as a developer, thinking about it, it's not 3 years away, right? I mean, they didn't give a date when it's coming out, but it's a year, maybe a year and a half. These things are going to come out a lot more faster and faster and faster. I'm not going to be every 3 years have a cadence of a new Visual Studio with C#.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that was kind of interesting to mention was the new version of C# will not require a new CLR.
Right.
Which is also, I think, an important thing.
Yeah,
it kind of fits into the same model with Visual Studio and ASP.NET is they want to be able to add features without requiring a new CLR. Because kind of a new CLR kind of imposes, like, Windows 10 has a new CLR. Windows whatever else would have the new CLR. There's a much more decoupling, which means we don't have to wait now for things to come out. So
which is a big difference from the origin of .NET when it was actually literally a part of Windows. It was ingrained in Windows, and it was kind of versioned with, maybe not necessarily Windows, but it was a significant thing that affected your entire system when you wanted to update the entire framework, and we're clearly moving away from that. And the major releases of .NET, the major versions of .NET were pretty closely tied to the major versions of Visual Studio. So you talk to developers and say, what version of .NET are you using? Well, I'm using Visual Studio 2013.
Yes. Yep.
No, that's not what I asked.
Right, but it used to be that way.
You know exactly what you
mean.
Yes, it used to bother me, but they weren't incorrect. I mean, it was a legitimate answer.
Well, I think what we're seeing with the improvements, both to C#7, some of the proposals, and C#6, and how you just said, Todd, it didn't require a whole new CLR, is I think they are getting a ton of mileage out of Roslyn, having rebuilt the compiler. And it wasn't just because they rebuilt it with C# itself. It seems that they had a chance to kind of do version 2, quote unquote, do it right. And that I've heard them say a few times that in trying to implement new language features, they were shocked at how easy it was in their new compiler versus just thinking about, oh gosh, if we tried to do this in the old compiler, forget it, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So
I know exactly what you're referring to. Yeah, with in discussions with the team, not discussions that I've had, but presentations I've heard and discussions I've overheard when they're not even talking about specific features that they're working on now or even upcoming, but it's really just a sense of excitement of what Roslyn enables them to do quickly and easily. Like they're just able to rev on the fundamental language features just better, right? They're more productive, basically.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting some
and out in the open too.
Benefit there, yeah.
I think that to me is the big important thing, being out in the open. The idea that we can see these things happening and contribute to it. That's something you may not be previously been able to really do.
Yeah, cool. So moving along, I was trying to just differentiate earlier. Visual Studio has now taken on a bunch of different names over the past 6 months, after the past couple of years. One of the other things that makes this whole thing more confusing is the release of Visual Studio Code earlier this year. I think it was like February, March, April, somewhere around there in 2015. And so what this is, Visual Studio Code, cross-platform Visual Studio, but it's not cross-platform Visual Studio. It's not the Visual Studio Native that we were just talking about.
Right. It's not the whole idea.
Yeah, it's not at all. It's much more closely related to text editors like Sublime Text or Notepad++ or whatever, which gives you just a rich editing experience. Right. And so they were talking a lot about that at Connect as well.
Yeah. Well, Visual Studio Code is built on the Atom shell. I think it's probably more correct to say it's built on Electron now because Atom's been busy. They've been busy over at GitHub renaming things too. But so they took that to say, like, this will be our editor, right? And at first, really, it was let's provide that stripped down experience of just text editing. But however, here it's funny how all things converge, right? So what we're seeing now at Connect is, hey, time to start adding features to this thing. But yeah, I mean, here's the one cool thing that you can't do with Visual Studio, the IDE, the big, Visual Studio 2015, is you can't run it on Linux, you can't run it on Mac, and this thing runs on Windows, Linux, Mac. I've run it on Linux in my playing around with Ubuntu and CentOS, with ASP.NET 5. I've brought up Visual Studio Code to try stuff out. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, so that is what I'm really excited about too, is that it's cross-platform. Not necessarily that I need to use it cross-platform, but just it's very interesting that now Microsoft has a product that's out in the market that can serve the needs of cross-platform developers, right? So you can have that same experience on Linux, Mac, and Windows, and so I've been using it since it came out, even the early beta versions, and it's always been very stable. But then the big announcement that they made at Connect was now they have full extension support or full support for extensions. And my initial reaction to that was, well, it's about damn time, right? I mean, it's that's been like
you're gonna compete with Sublime. You need that.
Exactly, but so all of these other ones, Sublime Text, it doesn't come like out of the box in Sublime Text, but Sublime Text has the package manager that you can go and install, and then you get the packages, and that's like the very first thing you do. It's basically part of the editor. Same thing with Atom, it's built in, and it's like any rich text editor that you have today, a extension support system, an extension system is like just a fundamental feature, and I'm surprised that it took them this long to kind of announce it, because I don't know this at all, but I've suspected the entire time that they've been building on this extension model internally, right? That's how they've added support for things like TypeScript and ASP.NET, right? Like they had this extensibility model in there. That's how they were building this tooling, but they finally just announced it, and that just kind of frustrated me that they waited so long. And I'm sure they had their reasons, right? I'm not really criticizing them. I mean that very literally. It just kind of frustrated me.
How long has code been out? Less than a year? It's a 2015 release, right?
Yeah, it's like 6 months, 7 months, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe what part of it could have been is just that they're vetting their own extension model. I don't know that for sure, like you said, And it was kind of a mature release too, because besides the fact that it supports extensions, there's this whole extension gallery now. You can go, it's online, the website's up and running. I mean, I guess you have that stuff for other things too. You have a website for Sublime package management, and
sure,
yeah, maybe it should have come out on release. That's a fair point.
I completely agree. I assume that they have been vetting it and making sure that it's rock solid. But going back to this, developing in the open and truly embracing open source, but then hiding something.
Oh, well, Visual Studio Code wasn't open source, right? But
Visual Studio
was the announcement.
Was never open source, right? So that was one of the big announcements in Connect is now it's open source, which is very suspicious to me that it's tied to this, right? So this is my criticism here is like, first of all, why hasn't it been open source the entire time? And I think this does go, it's one and the same, right? So they needed full stable extension support before they were willing to expose it to the public, right? And take criticism or whatever, because the moment they made it open source, the moment they made that source visible, people would see this extension system and start using it, and they could no longer hide it.
Let's look through the GitHub repo and figure out like if they've changed the extension support, right? Like maybe at what point scrapped their first version and then said, nah, this sucks.
Yeah.
So I just looked it up. It was April 29th, 2015 is when Code was released, initial release of it. So it's 5-6 months ago.
Yeah. Let me close my door here, Jess, if you want to.
And I know they've been working on it because I was part of the insider for that, and they definitely made a bunch of changes. They gave new builds almost every week, which seems like they were definitely doing a lot of experimenting and trying things out. I think what I look at as Visual Code is a couple different things. It's kind of interesting. It's open source. I think that'll make it much easier for other people to add their own modules and things and plugins. But also, when you think about it, it's free, right? I mean, what is the part of the big barrier of Visual Studio? I mean, there's now a community edition or something, but for a long time it was fairly expensive, right, to use Visual Studio, but it was so much more powerful than a lot of the other stuff out there. The idea now that Microsoft is building this editor, but very rich editor that's borrowing a lot from Visual Studio.
Yes.
It's to me it's a game changer for developers because it means that when I go to Sublime, I don't have to think how Sublime works. I have this tool that's going to work very similar to what I get in Visual Studio. And for the little parts I've played with it, when I've seen it, it seems like they have a pretty good idea. Eventually, it's going to have a lot of what Visual Studio has, and maybe even eliminate some of the things that are a problem with Visual Studio. I mean, if you load Visual Studio up, it's like, I don't know, 2 gigs just to start it up.
Yep. Well, and it takes a minute to start up, right? Especially if you've got
because it has all that history. So I definitely think it's even if you were talking to Jess, even if you are just a Microsoft developer on Windows, I feel it's a tool you should be using.
Absolutely.
As an extension of what you're doing.
Yeah, I use it. I use it quite a bit, and I've been doing basically all of my front-end development. So HTML, JavaScript, TypeScript development, 100% Visual Studio Code. And yes, like it's lacked a couple of features here and there, and it's generally stupid stuff. Like I miss the fact that like when I open a tag, when I create an opening HTML tag in Visual Studio, it will create the corresponding closing tag. Right? It's stupid stuff like that. Sure, I just go ahead and write it, right? I get IntelliSense when I go and write the closing tag, but I just wish that it did it for me. And now that the extension model is open, maybe I can go and do that myself or just assume that it's going to get fixed. But that little stuff is really not stopping me at all from using it as like my full-time editor. So really the only time I open full-blown Visual Studio or Visual Studio Native that I've come to calling it is when I actually have to compile C#. Right, when I need a solution, and I'm working on C# and I need a C# solution to really, get that IntelliSense and compile and everything. But I mean, with some of the stuff that we've seen with ASP.NET 5 and Core CLR and all of that, all of those demos are being demoed in Visual Studio Code with compilation and everything. So it's really intriguing.
And I'm pretty sure that Visual Studio Code on Linux and Mac today, you can debug ASP.NET 5. But I think what is left out of that statement is I'm pretty sure that debugging support today, if you're listening to the show today, so we're here at the end of November 2015, is not on Windows. And oddly enough, though, Node.js support works great. So
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
But I think that was easy for them too. I think that was a piece of cake. They just link into the Node debugger and they say, okay, awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
And there is debugger extension support in code. So besides just like what you're talking about, Jess, like, hey, I want to add some cool looking IntelliSense or whatever. I think there's like debugger extension support. So you could say, I want a Pascal debugger, since Anders was showing off his Pascal roots on stage.
Yes. Hello world.
Yep. But just to jump back to your point, Chris, just to jump back to your point, Todd, about being free and being on Windows and Linux and everything, I see that as really just lowering the barriers to entry to using this tool, right? You've really got no concerns to install it and start learning it and getting comfortable with it, because it'll be there no matter what machine you're on, no matter what platform you're on, and no matter how much money you have, it'll just be there to use it. And I don't mean to be selling it. I mean, this is legitimately, these are my legitimate feelings about this thing. I love it. I use it all the time.
I thought it would be the Atom or the Sublime that only Visual Studio devs used. And you know what? That may still be the case, right? Yeah. But I'm surprised that I have run into some people, either know them online or they've come to, for example, my game developer group, who are not programmers by trade.
Yep.
And one of them, who is an artist by trade, but he wants to make games, is saying, like, I've tried all those other editors and I've come to prefer Visual Studio Code. And he gave me this long list of reasons why. And I was taken aback. It surprised me. I figured Visual Studio Code would be only Windows devs, only Visual Studio devs are going to touch this thing. Everyone else is going to stick with Sublime and stick with Atom. And maybe that, look, I have one person that I can bring up, so I don't know. Right. It was a neat story, though.
Right. But not to take away from that, but, I mean, they are standing on the backs of giants, right? So as you open it up with, this is built on top of GitHub's editor, GitHub's Atom editor,
right.
Which itself is actually relatively immature. No, I mean, immature in terms of age, right?
Yeah, around a year or so.
They only just released a full Windows version, like I think earlier this year or late 2014. So that project is still pretty young, but Visual Studio is able to jump on top of that and add a whole bunch of stuff. Like, there is full-blown like CodeLens support in Visual Studio Code. CodeLens being, you hover over like a method and it can tell you where it's referenced and all of this crazy analytical stuff right there in this quote text editor.
And that's an enterprise feature.
Yeah,
people pay $3,000 a year for that. Right?
Yeah. It's
so Chris,
crazy.
quick question for you. You said you've used this on Linux and stuff. Is that CodeLens feature there too, or is that more?
So
or is that
what I used
coming now?
I used an ASP.NET 5 project, and what happens in Code is they connect to the OmniSharp backend. So yes, I do recall that I could click on something and see references, but my memory is a little fuzzy. I'd have to bring it back up to tell you exactly what it does. But I mean, I was impressed by the IntelliSense that I did get. But I also recognize that in some respects, OmniSharp is kind of like always running to catch up, because something's going to show up in the IDE or in the language first, and then they've got to go implement something.
Yeah.
And I think that'd be 100%.
We'll definitely do another show on OmniSharp. I think that deserves its own show, right? That's pretty huge right there.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
So one more quick thing.
Go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to say. So I thought it was kind of interesting too during the Connect show and stuff. They also talked about something new, at least new to me, called Visual Studio Install, where they were giving you ways to create a minimal version of Visual Studio. So kind of relating it back to Visual Studio Code, it kind of feels like Code sort of like a very lightweight thing, and that Microsoft is recognizing that even for Visual Studio, you don't always need the full-blown version of Visual Studio.
Yeah.
And there were a couple different interesting things I thought they did there in the demo. One was that it had the minimal thing. The other thing, it looked like you signed in and you actually could get old installations you've done. Like it would keep track of.
Right.
Oh yeah, cool.
Or maybe on this VM or something else you did that.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like the idea, at least for me personally, someone who works a lot of VMs, this idea like, well, what did I have installed here and different places and things? It felt like this is again a better experience. I don't need the 40,000 gigabyte version of Visual Studio sometimes just to debug ASP.NET application.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's
I definitely think
it's
kind of interesting.
That's my installation experience.
Yeah, they're definitely, what they showed on stage was working to modularize Visual Studio, and even to the point where you could say, I want to take a preview, and they would bring it down side by side, and you wouldn't have to live in fear that, like, oh, I just screwed up my Visual Studio, which, I mean, that's been getting better over the decades, but it still is a problem, right? You could take update 1, and I might not, and then we find out, like, oh, there's something that's not working for you anymore, so.
Yep. Yeah. So the one other thing I wanted to mention about Visual Studio Code is that it's all completely written in TypeScript. Just wanted to throw that out there.
It's your plus one.
Anyway.
So real quick, my other point was the idea that it feels like, even for Visual Studio Native, right, it feels like they're going to start borrowing things that are working in code. They might try something in code first, and then, like, hey, maybe that's something we can bring back into the thing. One other thing, or into native, one other thing they demoed was the can't remember what they called it, like open code from folder or something.
Oh yeah, Visual Studio VNext.
They were doing PHP code and stuff.
Right, instead of needing a solution file,
project file or something.
Like, welcome to modern IDEs, right?
Yeah.
But that's good. That's good. We need that.
It's another one of those features where you say it's about time. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It's convenient to have a solution file, but sometimes it's like, I just want to open this and save one randomly somewhere for me. Or how many times you got prompted, where do you want to save the solution file? I don't want one. I just want to look at the code.
Yes.
So my point is, it seems like these two things will coexist. You as a developer are going to end up using both of them.
Yeah.
Code will be used for what it's good for, and then you lose the native full version of Visual Studio for what it's good for.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, cool. So going back to the notion of free dev tools, free things. One of the other things they announced was Visual Studio Dev Essentials, which again they're using the Visual Studio name, and this is not a product as far as I can tell. This looks kind of like a subscription service or something like that, but it's free. Do you guys have any comments on that? Todd, did you have any thoughts on what's included? Are you clear on what's actually included in this package and who it's for and what do you get? And
not 100%. When I was listening to the show, I heard this. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So is this like something else under MSDN? And thinking about it for a few days, I kind of equate it back to, like, I'm gonna call it MSDN Lite. I mean, MSDN's expensive, right? If I want the full version, I don't even know how the price is anymore. It's thousands of dollars, and it seemed like. I wasn't 100% sure if this was 100% free or if there was a subscription model, but it seemed like it was something very affordable.
Yeah,
and it's something like it's core to what your developer.
I did track down what it is, and really, the way you could think of it is it's kind of a marketing packaging of all the free stuff that they're giving away now. So when you quote unquote sign up for the program, you get a web portal that very quickly points you at Visual Studio Community, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Express, which I'm not sure I would recommend anyone
what that is anymore.
That split personality version of Visual Studio anymore.
Yeah.
Team Foundation Server Express. But what also has happened is Microsoft is, I don't know how it's really happening under the covers, but partnering with a lot of other folks to give you some free stuff. So, for example, $25 a month Azure credit for the first 12 months that you're quote unquote in Dev Essentials.
Which is parallel cool.
Parallel subscription for Mac. They're basically promoting, by putting all this stuff in one place, that there is Azure App Service free products. There are Power BI free products and Hockey app free products and Application Insights free products. It's not that you and I and none of us, we can all use these things today. It's just, I think maybe for some people, if you don't put it in one place, they're not going to know what's available. And I know if you sign up right now, you get like a 6-month Pluralsight subscription. I'm not sure if that's forever. You get like a $25 credit for the Hack Hands, like one-on-one programming help. And really, and they even put in here in their list Microsoft Virtual Academy. Now, none of us need to sign up for Dev Essentials to go today to microsoftvirtualacademy.com and start watching videos.
Yeah.
It just seems to me a way for them to boil it into one spot, so that way when they're out in the field, and maybe they're talking to college kids or startups, and they say, well, how you said you have all this free stuff. How do I get started? Listen, here's what you do. You sign up for Dev Essentials, and the one-stop
marketing message.
Yeah, it's the one-stop marketing message. I mean, look, that's what it is. I'm not trying to defend it. It's the one-stop marketing portal to here's all the crap we give away for free.
Yeah. Well, for me, it kind of backfired because I knew about all these individual things, and then I went on there, and the very first thing I saw was Visual Studio Community asterisk, and then the asterisk was something like you get a free version for 25 days or something. I think they were actually referring to some other asterisk, but I'm trying to read this thing, and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Visual Studio Community is free, isn't it? Or are they now charging? That actually confused me more than it.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right, Chris. Is that this is really here's your portal. Here's everything you can get for free. Just sign
the
up.
legalese is ridiculously confusing. Yeah. But you know what else came out of there? A little footnote that I don't know a lot of people noticed was that Visual Studio. Basically, the MSDN subscriptions that we're used to paying for yearly, and then you get a perpetual license. There's now going to be yearly and monthly licenses that are not, perpetual. You can go $45 a month for MSDN Pro, and you can go $250 a month for. $45 a month for Visual Studio Pro, $250 a month for Visual Studio Enterprise. I don't know who's out there looking for that. I'm not sure. I figure if you're the kind of person who's saying I really need $45 a month for Visual Studio Pro, then you're probably a Visual Studio Community customer.
Yeah, right.
That's just what I'm thinking, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a direct reaction to Adobe's cloud services
not just Adobe.
Their subscription model. Yeah. Well, Adobe is the one I know, but yeah,
JetBrains has went that way with WebStorm and
and
everybody. Yeah. So interesting.
It's interesting you brought up WebStorm. Because I kind of feel like code and some of those things are almost competing to WebStorm in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
I think WebStorm's a bigger IDE and has its own solution file issues, which they are cleaning up. Like, I've had some folks who, they've tried using WebStorm, and they're like, what do I do with this .idea file? And I go, oh, that's just like my .sln file, right? It's this thing, this appendage that you kind of want to go away in the modern world, but it's hanging on.
Hanging out with your life. So with all this stuff, I think it's kind of interesting that a lot of it ties back to Azure. And I think a lot of it, that's really the point of all this, is that Microsoft wants to increase Azure's market share. Or they want to promote what they have for free.
Azure.
Huh?
Yeah. They're clearly selling Azure.
Yes, which is fine. And I think in many ways it's a good message for developers, because I think a lot of developers are like, Azure's something I need to worry about maybe 5 years from now. And it kind of feels like now they're getting a clearer message that this is something you need to worry about now. I mean, they started the whole thing out talking about how everything's mobile ready, cloud ready, and I'm like, they've been saying that for a few years, and I kind of feel like as developer, the community, we're still a year or two away from where they want us to be, but it's still good that the message is there and getting clearer. Because I think that's probably the biggest criticism I'd have is a lot of times the message isn't clear. I mean, even when we talked about today, they're calling everything Visual Studio now. Before it was all .NET, right? And 6 years ago it was xxserver.net, and it was all got very confusing. What was what? So,
and one of those big renames that they made a pretty big deal about at Connect was that they renamed what previously was called Visual Studio Online, which again, you had Visual Studio Online, Visual Studio Code, and then Visual Studio, what I'm calling Visual Studio, native or classic. But it used to be called Visual Studio Online, but really what that was Visual Studio. It was TFS in the cloud. It wasn't really Visual Studio at all. It was TFS in the cloud. It had some code editing and it had an online editor, but that's not at all what it was. It was a whole suite of services. And so that's now known as Visual Studio Team Services, which are things that you can get the entry level for free in the Dev Essentials. But yeah, I mean, that's TFS in the cloud. So that's work items, continuous integration builds, all of this stuff. And that is pretty freaking exciting. I mean, that being able to, you have a Git repository, right? You can create a Git repository in your TFS solution, your Visual Studio Team Services solution, and then you can do things like commit to your Git repository, which will trigger a continuous integration build. So just like you're doing, if you're using continuous integration on-premise today with your TFS server on-premise, it's the same exact workflow, except it's in the cloud and you're getting all these new features. Because the TFS team, the Visual Studio Team Services team, is really revving hard on these things. They're releasing new features every 3 weeks is their cycle.
Yeah.
And so now you have access to that. Even under the lowest level, the Dev Essentials level, they've got
Right. And even under that lowest level, you get some free credits for the test, the load testing stuff.
The dev test, yeah.
Now you don't. It's not going to go super far what you get, but it actually, just in my playing around, I've never incurred a bill, and that's when I said like, hey, I'm going to throw 1,000 users at this site, and even before I started up, it says like, oh, this is going to be 65 cents worth against your credit, and I forget what it is a month, but it was much more than 65 cents. You know what's funny about it being renamed again is remember that Visual Studio Online was the renaming of Team Foundation Server Online.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, can't find the right name. Keep changing it until it sells.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of that a lot of what you're talking about, Jess, with the build process of things. I think that it opens the door up for a lot of developers, particularly for smaller shops or even for bigger shops that maybe aren't doing or have a build server today, and there might be certain things they need to do to get a build server up and going.
Yep. The
fact that this is coming is a pretty big deal.
Yep.
I mean, I work with a lot of different customers who cross the gamut of different control systems, source control systems, and how we access some things. And we're starting to see a lot of customers starting to look to do some kind of online service, whether it be GitHub or some of the other ones that are already out there. To me, Microsoft is also offering this, and I can see a lot of Microsoft shops gravitating towards this if the price is affordable, because it's something they're already used to. It's in their ecosystem. It's an extension of what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And let's face it, TFS on-premise is really expensive. I don't know. I've never actually had to pay for it, but I've heard. It's really expensive because you're not just saying, let me buy TFS source control or let me buy TFS integrate. You're saying, let me buy TFS, which is the whole full package, whether you use it or not, right? And so with this model, the Visual Studio Team Services model is more of kind of a monthly subscription kind of thing, and you like pay per user. So it's something like $5 or whatever. I don't have the pricing structure in front of me, but like some relatively affordable thing per developer, and so it scales with your organization, right? And so you can just start using all this stuff in the cloud and pay for what you use because it's all in the Azure ecosystem. And it seems like a pretty affordable.
And not to mention, you don't pay for the care and feeding of the build server.
Oh, yeah.
The care and feeding of the deployment slots or process, the care and feeding of a load testing setup, which, hey, who's doing that? Let's be honest.
In other words, it's platform as a service, right? It truly is platform as a service. Like you literally don't know what version of Visual Studio Team Services you're running because it's just you're running on the latest version. It's whatever they update every 3 weeks, right? You've got those new features and they roll them out and you get access to them. So it's actually really fun.
You bring up a good point there.
This platform becomes the sneak preview of what you might expect to see in the next version of TFS on premise. Yes. So this is the place where you can get the new features and not your on-premise solution, not the thing that you're paying a whole lot of money for on-premise.
Yeah. Brian Harries actually said that to us. You might have heard him say that, but when he was down here in Philly to talk to Philly.net, those were the words right out of his mouth. Is that what you see coming out of what at that time was called Visual Studio Online is what you're going to eventually see in our on-prem product. And because, like you said, you were talking about just their development cycle. It's they're deploying and shipping to the cloud-based version all the time.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Which sort of, it's funny. We talked about how they really really want their developers to understand Azure, and I think there's some great announcements, which I think we have a list of, and they're all announcements of another little product, another platform as a service thing in Azure. And I just wonder how many developers are out there when they think of the cloud, they still think of what's essentially just like servers on racks that when I go to AWS, I get a server and I've got to boot it up and I've got to care and feed it and install patches and updates, and that's whether I'm Linux or Windows. And isn't Azure just the same thing?
Yeah, including me, right? I've had an Azure subscription for years now, and I go in and I have this full list of all these services, and I have no idea what any of them mean. And I go and I create a new VM and I create a new web app, and those are the only two that I use, right? But there's dozens of things there.
Right, and that's part of the problem. And to be fair, I've gone over to the AWS portal, and I've flipped away from just creating just straight VMs, and I've had the same. Wow, look at all of these things. What do they do?
What are
they? They have to have snazzy marketing names, and that's not making fun of it.
Right.
It just is what it is.
Right.
And it's happening on both sides, both of these competing models. And Microsoft's got to figure out a better way to explain to us, like, what is Service Fabric? What is Hockey App? What is Graph API?
Well, more importantly, why do I want to use it?
Yeah, how is it going to help me?
Yeah,
what is
it going to
application insights?
Yeah. Well, so do we want to just kind of do this hit list real quick of the things that they announced? So the one big thing they announced at Connect was the Graph API.
Right.
And I literally I watched the demo. I have no idea how it affects me as a developer.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I actually tried to use it. I tried to use it, I logged in, and nothing came back. I'm like, okay, I was hoping to get something. Because we actually use Office 365, so I was expecting to get back a list of myself and all the people, and I kept calling it. So wasn't quite sure if it wasn't ready when I was doing it, or you have to sign up for a developer license or something. It wasn't very clear. Because all the documentation said, just go to this link, click get, and you'll get something. And I'm like, I didn't get anything.
Well, so you just mentioned it's Office 365, right? That's the context of stuff that you can graph, or is it bigger than that?
I wasn't sure. That's what I was trying to figure out. Since I know that we use Office 365, I was expecting to get back something. I didn't get anything. In the brief documentation I looked at, they talked about Active Directory and Office 365. That's all that was really written so far.
Yeah.
That's sort of the impression I get. You have to be in the Microsoft cloud ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I
even
think from a high level, though, it's kind of interesting. It's almost, I think, their first piece they're trying to go towards, like when IBM has Dr. Watson and thing. I think there's going to be more and more stuff coming there. It's not just this getting the list of all the people in your Active Directory. I think it's going to end up being a lot more from an analytics point of view.
Right.
Yeah. It definitely was a little frustrating to hear that they were obviously really excited about it, but you've got to figure most of the developers in the audience who weren't following along with the preview understand what the Office Graph is. And how can you blame them?
Yeah,
no, it was kind of like thrown in the middle. Oh, by the way, we have this too. Wait a minute, there's one more thing.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay, so then they talked about Hockey App, which was an acquisition.
Right, which I felt the same way about, because they're talking about it like it's been this application or this service that's been out there for years, and of course you use it, right? Aren't you using it?
I'm like, you use Hockey App?
What? I texted you, Chris. I texted Chris while I'm sitting here watching this thing. I'm like, dude, what is Hockey App? I've literally never heard of this.
Yeah.
So when I was listening to the Connect thing, I was like, is this a demo? Are they going to demo something? Or I mean, is this like a demoing something else? And I'm like, no, it's something else.
No,
like, what is
it's a company that they bought. And then they just, they didn't do the Microsoft thing. Because you got to figure that normally they buy a company and then they were going to rename it to Microsoft Test Mode and Ship API, right?
Premium 2015
CTP for Windows. But I think maybe
Windows or Microsoft Test.
Yeah, but I mean, in this case, maybe the Hockey App name had some cachet, and it just seems to me like it was, it's a lot of services to help you when you're trying to evaluate your mobile app, including crashes or allowing your beta users to provide feedback, or maybe your regular users to provide feedback. And I hate to say the word maybe and diminish Hockey App, but like most developers probably out there listening to this show, these are new words to us.
Yep.
Service
Fabric. You may not be used to it.
Right? What is this? What is Service Fabric? And the best explanation we're getting is, it's kind of a way to have platform as a service microservices, including stateful services, so reminiscent of like maybe what Akka is doing. But again, our listeners are going to be like, well, really, what's that?
Yeah,
exactly.
There's just so many questions about all this new stuff that's hitting both Microsoft and not Microsoft.
Yeah, my thought with that is, I was like, is that like App Fabric is for what the WCF or Windows, for what server version had that in there? And I didn't get a chance yet to dig in to see if it was related to something else.
Well, it better be, because that's their name, so hopefully it's the same.
Yeah, but God forbid the same name means something.
Yeah.
I know they also talked about this thing called Application Insights, which is, I think, is an evolution of the Health API they've had for a while. I know Gatsby has some things built into it, and there are other
you mean
Microsoft products have
application health, not like health, like healthcare.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, not to confuse them, because everything was healthcare related.
There's a lot of healthcare demos.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's yet another product. Yeah, it's yet another product that they've been talking about for about a year and demoing for about a year. And in Visual Studio, all of us can check a box that'll subscribe our web app to Application Insights. And then basically what happens is, I guess, if you get a bunch of 404s or whether it's errors or log messages or whatever, you can go to a central place and view data, graphs, view the actual messages. One of the things, though, we were talking about Visual Studio, and clearly there is a segment of customers who must keep telling Microsoft, Visual Studio is my flight deck. When I'm sitting aboard my 747 every day coding, I want to live in this thing, right? And I use that terminology because there's no question that Visual Studio is like a commercial jumbo jet flight deck of an IDE.
Yep.
Aircraft carrier.
Yeah, but if you wanted to use Application Insights previously, you would have to get out of that IDE, open the Azure portal, and view your website's performance. And Scott Hanselman demoed on stage, oh, look, everyone, we've brought that into your IDE.
Horrible.
I look at that experience and I say, I wasn't asking for that. And it's, I'm glad I guess somebody is, though. Somebody is asking for this.
Yeah, I think that's one step away from doing things like publishing your application from Visual Studio, which I think is one of the biggest anti-patterns ever, right? So I follow very strict ALM practices for deploying and everything, and one of them is, first of all, you check into a central repository, right? You get the code off of your machine, build it on somebody else's machine, so you get away from that works on my machine syndrome, test it on another machine, and then deploy it from another machine.
Right. They demoed that too.
Yeah, being able to publish directly from Visual Studio just circumvents all of that. Right. No, you're right. They did demo that.
So published to Docker right on stage.
So that was exciting, right?
And the three of us are like, that's not going to be part of my day-to-day workflow. Like, that's not the production workflow I'm going to set up. But there's, I wonder if it's not even so much customers asking for it. It's just trying to get that mind share out by putting it in people's face. I don't know.
Or is it just because it's cool to demo? It was an easy thing for them to add, so it's cool to demo. Because if you think about it, I mean, ultimately, if the bigger picture is, what is Application Insight? What is everything else we've been talking a lot about? It's in Azure, right? So the idea that from Visual Studio, I can hit a button and all of a sudden I've deployed to Docker, or I've checked it into TFS Online or Visual Studio Online, whatever terminology you want to use, and a build process kicks off and stuff. It's that turnkey, out of the box experience, because that's, to me, ultimately with Visual Studio, what is a big selling point is it does so much for you. You don't even have to set up a build server, right? I go into click on a few buttons and all of a sudden I have a build server.
Sure.
I also think a lot of times is, from our point of view, we know like the best practice things. So you want to have a build server, you want to have a continuous integration. For a lot of developers, that's still not something that's in their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
So,
well, look, you know what I have done? I have used that publish feature when I was just messing around. Like, I just kind of want to see it work.
I did it just the other day. Yeah, I did it just the other day.
I just want to see something work. So let me go ahead and publish to IIS, and I give it the name of the server, or heck, even nowadays, let me just throw it up in web apps. I just want to see it work. Maybe that's good. Maybe it gets you going, and then you're more comfortable to go figure out your production workflow.
That's not what they're selling, though. Right?
No, I know.
They're selling you never, ever, ever, ever have to leave Visual Studio for any reason ever, right? Including all the way to production and making production fixes.
But don't forget, go download code.
Yeah, definitely get Visual Studio Code. So one thing I think is kind of interesting is when they talk to developers, they call it Azure. But if you look at anything like in marketing outside of that, they call it Microsoft Cloud now. I've seen it on commercials, I've seen it on literature and things, and I'm like, is Azure and cloud the same thing? In my mind, it's the same thing, but it's just something I think is interesting that in a lot of non-developer worlds now, they're pushing this thing called Microsoft Cloud while they're still calling it Azure in here. I think it's interesting, and the reason why I brought it up is at some point, are we just going to be using Azure for everything and we're not even realizing it? We're just going to hit compile Visual Studio and the Roslyn compiler will be in Azure and we won't even know it's there.
I think we're partially there already. I think there's so much happening in Azure already that we're not even aware of.
They must know that the CEO who's watching the Masters is not going to get anything out of the term Azure.
Right.
So you're watching.
Well, that's why I think
you're watching football on Sunday, or you're watching golf. they're going to call it Microsoft Cloud.
Yep. No, I mean, I've literally been in meetings with business folks that said, I was watching the Super Bowl the other day, and I saw a commercial about IBM's cloud. Does this help us get into the cloud?
Yeah, right.
That's what they know.
Is that
definitely
all?
Marketing message.
So what was the big announcement for web developers? ASP.NET 5? Was that it?
I guess so. They led with it. We didn't lead the show with it, but they led with it.
I think the big part was the idea of it's the Go Live license. And when I heard that, and I was like, I think in many ways this reminds me of when .NET first came out, which was like June 2001. Is like there was beta 2 of .NET, and there was like I'm pretty sure it was a Go Live license then, because to me this signals Microsoft saying this now runs on cross-platform.
Right.
I think this is going to be. You look back 4, 5, or 6 years from now, if this continues to evolve, or I kind of feel like it's going to evolve, you're going to come back and say, you know what? In November 2015, that's what Microsoft went this direction, and they were successful with that.
Right.
That is the future of .NET. It's here now.
This is ASP.NET 5, but it is V1 of ASP.NET and .NET cross-platform.
Right. And .NET Core is live with a Go Live license on Linux, Mac, Windows. You can go into production, and they'll support you.
Well, and to be clear, I don't think we mentioned it, but they are RC1 now is the big announcement.
Yes.
And along with Release Candidate 1, that means a couple things. It means that the API is pretty stable, right? So they're saying this is a release candidate. In other words, this is what we intend to go live with, and we might have some bug fixes and stuff and maybe some small tweaks, but like you can write a bunch of code against this and you're not going to have major breaking changes after this. You might. They're not making any promises, but like their intentions are to not make any breaking changes.
Right.
And so also along with that is, and by the way, go ahead and release it to production, right? And if you have problems, we'll help you out. We'll support you.
Right. And I think it has been stated there will be an RC2. Like that is out there.
Yeah, right.
And then obviously an RTM.
And then
I can tell people
thinking March-ish, maybe March-ish, April.
Yeah. Late Q1 of 2016. Late. Like maybe
so late that it might actually be Q2.
Hang on, your thing. What I was going to say was I want to warn people. I've dealt with things that have Go Live licenses. A lot of times the support requires you to upgrade right away, or in a certain period of time.
This absolutely does. So
you don't think you're going to deploy now and not go to the release candidate. I don't know why you wouldn't go to the RTM, but there is this expectation that you are keeping up to date. It's just something to keep in mind.
That expectation was made clear that part of the license is you'll go to RC2 and you'll go to RTM, and otherwise if you don't, then sorry, closed for support.
Yeah. Right. But then the other side of that, when you're talking about expectations, the other side of that is that it's pretty performant, and you're not going to have any huge bugs and all this stuff, right? It's not going to be crashing all the time. And it's going to be relatively fast. It might not be the fastest it's going to be before V1, but it's going to be pretty fast, and it's production ready, in quotes, right? With some Yeah, so I do. I think that was the big thing, and along with that is, as it always has been with ASP.NET 5, is just the big emphasis on open source. And open source, I saw, was a pretty big theme across most announcements at Connect, with the exception of some of the Azure stuff. But all of this Visual Studio stuff, and ASP.NET 5, .NET Core, all of these things, and even the new versions of C# and Roslyn, and all of this stuff is just open, to the point where Scott Guthrie said, let me quote him specifically. I wrote this down while I was watching. Scott Guthrie said, Anders, meaning Anders Heilsberg, demoed an open source language on a Mac on stage next to a Google developer. Right? And like this represents the state of things in Microsoft today. This is how much they've embraced that. And I've mentioned earlier when we were talking about Visual Studio Code about how I still have major criticisms in terms of like, well, let's just close it until we're really ready to open it. Like that just kind of goes against the nature of it. But with ASP.NET 5 and .NET Core, pretty much from the beginning, they were very, very open with the source, meaning, displaying the source, accepting pull requests, but also developing in public, having conversations in public.
Yeah.
Getting feedback, not necessarily just code, pull requests and code changes, but actual feedback and discussions with the community. Not this ivory tower of we are going to figure out the direction of this, but open it up to the world and say, hey, we have a pretty good idea where we want to go. What do you think? Why don't you join the conversation?
Well, you saw that they had, they obviously brought a Google employee on stage and had a video where a series of Google employees, including the program manager of Angular and the founder of Angular, said, hey, we use Visual Studio Code and we built Angular 2 in TypeScript.
Yep.
That's because Visual Studio Code, they mentioned they were using it to actually write.
Do you think it's Microsoft trying to ride on Angular success, or maybe there really is something there that the Angular team said we can't really move forward without sharper tools, and it just happened to be a good fit, and everybody decided to be open about and caring, and look, they're on stage together talking about how awesome it is to work together. How weird.
No, I do think that is a big validation of how much Microsoft has embraced cross-platform. Maybe not open source, but certainly cross-platform, to the point where Google, that's just another company. Google doesn't necessarily translate it into Linux, although Android is Java and a Linux base. But Google really represents kind of open source, at least in this regard, open source and cross-platform, meaning any browser on any platform kind of thing, not Windows, not native Windows assemblies, right? And so I think the fact that they're saying Visual Studio Code and TypeScript and all of this stuff, in other words, Microsoft has put out something, an alternative to standard JavaScript tooling and all of this, and not only do we like it, not only do we approve of it, it is so good that we are choosing this over many other options that are out there in the community right now from various other sources, right? So I just think that it just really validates the work that they're doing and the direction they're going and actually producing cross-platform and open source tools and languages.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting that they mentioned that. I ultimately think that a lot of it has to do with Microsoft's sort of bigger picture, that everything, I always tell people, all roads lead to Azure. And to me, the big thing with Azure is they don't want to tell you have to be Windows. They want you to be Windows, right. But hey, our stuff works on Linux. You can do PHP, you can do Python, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and everybody benefits from that attitude.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, I think it's better for TypeScript, but also Visual Studio Code that Google was actually using it. That means it's ultimately going to be a better product. It isn't just a bunch of guys in Redmond using it. It's going to evolve into a very stable product that works across all the different platforms.
Yep.
But there's one thing that I wanted to bring up that sort of it always kind of confuses me, and when I hear it, I think it definitely confuses other developers. And that's this idea Microsoft says, hey, you can now use Visual Studio to target all these different platforms and things. And then when they go to do the demo, they don't go out of their way to mention, yeah, you're writing your Visual Studio Code, you're building this portable class library, and now you're going to compile it for Android and iOS. Oh, by the way, we're using Xamarin to do that.
Right.
Because I think a lot of people get the impression that, hey, it's out of the box now. I can get Xamarin in Visual Studio. I know that when I first looked at Visual Studio 2015, I'm like, there was one of the templates that said Xamarin. I'm like, cool. Does this now mean I don't have to pay for Xamarin? Because Xamarin is an additional cost. There is a community version, but pretty much primarily if you want to use any of the more advanced features, you have to have this other license. And when you compile Visual Studio 2015, when you go to compile it, it lets you kind of run on Windows, but if you then want to target iOS, it goes, hey, developer license in. And I just think it's the wrong message. I think they're I don't want to be super critical of the idea, but I really wish they'd kind of talk about it a little more and then help sell Xamarin. Because, I mean, it does solve a big problem, the idea of being able to run C# across all these different platforms. But ultimately, I think it just, they don't give the whole story. And that's sort of, my takeaway from a lot of this stuff. It's great that I can now use Visual Studio Code and Core CLR and ASP.NET 5 on Linux, but, what is my motivation to do that? I have some ideas. Okay, maybe I have a client who wants to take advantage of all this stuff, but they don't want to pay for a Windows license for a server. Now we can tell them, hey, we could do this with Linux. And that's a good selling point. I don't think they have a clear message. It's great, it's open source, all these things are there, but ultimately I think that they are doing somewhat of a disservice to developers without being crystal clear.
Well, so Xamarin is pretty specifically targeted to mobile, right?
Yes.
iOS.
Yeah,
so iOS, Android.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about running Linux, but I do agree with your sentiment, Todd, that it's kind of misleading where they come up and they say, and you have full .NET support via Xamarin. Just use the Xamarin tools, right? And it's kind of misleading, but I think the end result is the same. Like that's all developers really care about. Like if I get Xamarin, then I have full .NET support, and I think the selling point is write once, run anywhere. Oh, you know, the holy grail of development that everybody's always trying to get, and we're pretty close with that at the mobile in the mobile space with Xamarin, and I think that's what they're selling. I think they are being a little bit not really sure what the word is, but you know, dishonest or misleading to say, you know, we Microsoft are giving a solution that if you get Xamarin, you can use .NET on Android and Linux, right? But you know, the message is the same. There's a solution out there where you can use .NET and C#.
There is a solution now built into the Visual ecosystem.
In the ecosystem, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So again, I think it's good that all this stuff is happening, and definitely being an open source is good. I just think sometimes they're going more for the big demo, and less for the practical. I mean, we talked about it a little bit here with the idea of, oh, Application Insight sounds interesting, or the fact I can do this for Visual Studio sounds interesting, but how much of it is real world, and how much is more demo? And I think ultimately developers need to figure that out. That can sometimes be frustrating.
Well, and along those same lines, Todd, you pointed this out. I didn't notice it, but apparently it looked like they were doing native compiling on Linux. So I think this is not Xamarin, right? So this was demonstrating their .NET Core running on Linux, where you can actually make .NET applications running that compile natively to Linux. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I can't remember which, it was the second or third demo that Hanselman did. It was funny. Scott Hanselman and Scott Group kept jumping back and forth. Was the whole Scott show. He showed what I think he called it a preview of the SSH client that's being built into Windows, which I've heard about, but I didn't realize it was sort of coming anytime soon, or would actually be something Microsoft is going to release. It sounds like it's going to be part of Windows. At some point, one Windows update will have this built into it, which I think is kind of cool. And what he was showing was the idea, he built his app in Visual Studio Code, and he had deployed it out to Docker, I believe, what he was doing. And then he used this SSH client to basically shell over to an Ubuntu box, bring up the command line to be able to compile the code. He compiled it first to basically Visual Studio, or to .NET Core, and then when he was done, he goes, you know, would it be really cool if at some point in the future, I think that's actually the terminology used, we were able to compile this to native. And whenever you hear the word native, I think people get confused what that means. What I thought was interesting he talked about is, it sounded like it was basically assembly code native, because he talked about it was statically linked, it was all packaged into one thing. You didn't need a DLL.
Right.
You basically had that full product.
No CLR. Yeah. So it's .NET Native is what it really is. And .NET Native has that term has been kicked around for a couple of years now, but it's coming to fruition. Today, .NET Native is actually being used on the Universal Windows platform. So if you were to write an app and publish it to the Windows Store for, like, say, Windows 10, then what they do after you submit your app is they use .NET Native to, I guess, recompile it, and that eliminates the CLR. There's no jitter, no garbage collection. That's all gone. I mean, I don't know how it actually works under the hood. And what they've been promising us is that someday this capability will be in your hands. And it seems that what they're also saying is this capability is going to be in your hands as a Windows developer, perhaps deploying a web application to a Windows server. Oh, but by the way, it's going to go across all of .NET Core, so you could have a native Mac or Linux app, and the performance gain could be, I mean, it sounds like there's an opportunity here to really start to knock people's socks off in terms of performance.
Yeah, that's a good
definitely
point.
The performance.
It's way away.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think, like, when I started seeing Core CLR, I also thought back to a lot of the same stuff they were trying to do with Silverlight, is they seem like they've opened the door themselves up to basically having the .NET runtime, almost like Java, right? The idea it could run on any device, on any platform. And I know we briefly talked a little bit about Xamarin. It seems like, what if I didn't need Xamarin or anything else? What if I could actually write iOS apps or Android apps or whatever other platform comes about? I mean, they mentioned HoloLens and some other things in there. Right from Visual Studio on Windows, I hit a button, it goes to Azure or whatever it needs to magically do, and all of a sudden now my device next to me has my app deployed, natively deployed. I'm writing native iOS code with C#.
Yep.
Well, that's Xamarin today, but I hear what you're saying. Is the problem is that's a flavor of. I mean, it's not that it's different .NET. It's that you can't build a Xamarin app and then go put it on an Xbox because that's a different universal platform. The Xamarin platform is universal for those devices, and then the quote-unquote universal Windows platform is universal for those devices. And that unification, look, I don't know if somebody much in secret places away from us in Redmond and so on is planning this, but you feel like it has to, like this is something that's got to happen.
Well, the one thing I think about every time I have this discussion is think about what Microsoft is doing. What does it benefit them? Well, the biggest place to benefit them is Office, right? The idea that they could potentially have 90% of their code for Excel and Word core, and then they have this build process or some other way of doing it, and now all of a sudden they have the iOS version, they have the Android version, they have Windows, they have, I don't think we would ever have Office on Xbox, but use that as another example.
Yeah,
I don't know. To me, it seems like we're at a starting point, and there's a clear roadmap ahead where you can see this kind of going, and I think it's a good thing, right? I think as someone who lives in the client-side world, right now, it's a barrier to be able to tell people, all right, you can go full native, or you can use Cordova, or you can use Xamarin, or you can just use mobile web. Each one sort of has pros and drawbacks.
And nothing's perfect.
Huh?
Yeah, nothing's perfect among those.
No, and it's sure it won't be perfect either. But it feels like it could open other avenues up. So,
right.
And it kind of fits into the whole big roadmap of what they're doing.
When you lay out those choices for customers, well, you could do Cordova, you could do Xamarin, you could do this. None of them are perfect. And that's part of like the hamstring, right? Is the customer now has to decide what to toss off the boat. Like, okay, well, this isn't going to be important to us. And it's a decision you have to make before you can possibly know what the right answer is.
Yeah. Or may want to change it 6 months down the line. Yeah, it definitely is.
All right, cool. So wrap it up. Why don't we go with, let's see, I guess let's do some summaries here. Just ask for your feedback on just sum up this stuff. How do you want to?
Oh, just like what did we think of Connect?
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. So getting to the top of the hour here, why don't we just do like a quick lightning round? Just your quick feedback on just overall thoughts with Connect. I mean, what do you think? What's your takeaway? What are you interested in? What are you going to go look into? What are your next steps, basically? Todd, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So a couple quick bullet points. Number one, I mean, I've been familiar with ASP.NET 5 coming out for a while, like probably at least a year and a half. I can't remember when it first came about. And it now feels like it's real. It's out there. It's something I can start discussing with customers and even start telling people, hey, this has a go live license. Maybe it's time to start moving towards this. Because there are some fundamental differences between ASP.NET today and ASP.NET 5 moving forward that I think a lot of people would want to take advantage of, or also they want to build apps for multiple years. The other things that kind of got to me thinking was, we talk a lot about Azure and all these different versions of Visual Studio, particularly Visual Studio Code. It definitely feels like something developers should be using in addition to Visual Studio Native or Core or whatever you want to call it. The other thing, a couple other interesting things that we didn't really talk about here, but I think some developers should take a look at is they talked about adding support for like languages like R and Python in Visual Studio, but also they've kind of dropped it right in the middle, the fact that R is going to be built into SQL Server 2016, and that's a whole other type of big topic. But the idea that Microsoft sees this whole other things that are opening up with the machine learning and things like that, I really think that as developers, there's an avenue there for you. And then they even talked a little bit about the idea that you may build different parts of your applications in different languages. They talked a couple of places about there. And just kind of summarize is there's a lot of cool, interesting things to learn, and you just got to kind of try to feel around and get an idea what all these different pieces are. These are all going to become eventually things you need to know or at least be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, how about you?
So last year's Connect, the first time they had this event and called it Connect and so on, I think it's fair to say that they shocked a lot of the world when they came out on stage and said, guess what, Roslyn is open source, and oh, by the way, .NET Core, and here I'm open source as of this key press, it is now open source. And then they were actually on stage and got their first pull request submitted and approved, which I think Xamarin was supposed to come on stage in kind of a staged pull request, but got beaten to the punch there.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the Shock the World Connect. This one felt to me like the checkpoint. Here's what we said. You heard what we said we were going to do. Look at what we've got done. Some of this stuff is happening now, and it's just about ready for you to start to use. And that's how I felt. I think that for you as the .NET developer, I would say there's a lot of content in Channel 9 now, not just those keynotes and videos, but some of those quote-unquote on-demand videos to check out. So much to learn. It just seems like it keeps growing. And it seems like coming out of this show, this is the show where our listeners could really tell us of that huge laundry list of things. What you need to hear about? What do you want to learn about? There's a tremendous opportunity here to say, coming out of Connect, this is what I'm interested in.
Yep. Yeah. So for me, it was a lot about tooling, and so even the stuff that's in the cloud, Azure, and all this stuff, they were really selling the Azure services. But what I saw was tooling. It was tools to help me build better applications, right? And so the biggest tooling for me, the biggest thing that excited me was Visual Studio Code. Is now beta. That was the big announcement, and that it supports extensions, which, as I said earlier, was a huge, long time coming. But that just reinforced the behavior I was already doing, which I was already using Visual Studio Code. So that I was very excited about that. Just to see Visual Studio Code just rapidly becoming a really, really mature and solid editor, even though it's always been solid, it's just still going, right? But even all the other stuff, even if I didn't even know what they meant, all the Azure services and things, they just looked like interesting things to look into to, instrument my applications, build better, more mature, more robust applications, find bugs, find issues, and everything. I'm honestly not sure which ones I'm going to be looking into, but the things that really interested me as well, and we didn't really talk about them in this show because there weren't like specific features or anything, is all of the build and ALM stuff in Visual Studio Online, or what was Visual Studio Online, now Visual Studio Team Services, but just reinforcing all of those good ALM practices. And I'm not talking about the integrated stuff in Visual Studio where you can publish to Docker from Visual Studio, but
magic button time.
Exactly. No, not that stuff, but all the great stuff that is apparently for free in TFS Online or Visual Studio Team Services. Where you can have these builds, you can integrate them, you can run your unit tests. They showed some features of like taking screenshots of your mobile application and submitting them to work items. That was all cool, but just the larger idea of just, here, go and enhance your development workflow, right? Concentrate on getting a really good, productive development workflow, and here are some tools to help you do that. So that's what I was really excited about, is really reinforcing that good development workflow.
Awesome.
So, and you, listener, what do you think? We want to hear what you think. As Chris was just saying, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. There are a whole bunch of options for shows, topics of shows that we want to do. We've got our own little internal list, right? And we've got our things that we want to talk about. But we are absolutely interested in hearing what you would like to hear about. Are you excited about ASP.NET 5, that it's finally out of beta and it's getting closer to final release? Or are you using Visual Studio Code? And if so, what do you use it for? Are you excited about the fact that it supports extensions, things like that? Are you actually doing anything with Azure, right? So do any of these announcements for Azure actually affect you? Are you using any of this stuff? Are you excited about any of it? Forget about Azure, any cloud services, Amazon. So Microsoft obviously is selling Azure. They announced a whole bunch of stuff about Azure, but are you using similar services and tools in other platforms like Amazon Web Services? So we want to know, right? Please leave us a comment on the website, staticvoidpodcast.com, or send an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com, and we would love to hear what you think. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like to discuss on the show, And as always, if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on the show, feel free to let us know through those same channels that I just talked about. We want to make sure we're talking about the things that you want to hear about. So, Chris, Todd, thanks for the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Catch y'all next time.
Thank you, listener, for spending the time with us. We hope it was valuable for you, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Static Void Podcast. Bam. That was tight. Other than the 12 minutes at the end where we got into an hour and then just kept on talking.
That was
a couple places in between you probably cut out too.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think, at the end we went a little bit off, but that's fine. No, that was awesome. Okay, so TypeScript. What's your gut, Todd, especially since it's going to be a huge debate between you? Are you... It's 12:15, so we have to assume we're going to at least 1:30. Do we want to do that first and foremost? And are you prepared? Like, do you want more time? Do you need more time to discuss it? I never even wrote down. I have it in my head, but I never wrote down the kind of bullet points for us to coordinate against.
Yeah, I have a bunch of bullet points, but I think it's important to structure it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, I was thinking, what if you guys each send me bullet points and then I try to turn it into...
Oh, cool. Yes. Awesome.
A directed... I don't want to call it a debate, but that's kind of what it is.
No, absolutely. I want it to be. I want it to be a moderated debate. I mean, I want it to be like a freaking political debate. That's what it is. It's a political debate.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. It's about politics or religion. Yeah. So what I was thinking was, and I didn't know if this was going to work, but I'll throw it out there. Almost like a trial approach, sort of where we each have an open statement, kind of setting what our viewpoint is or why we have sort of this viewpoint.
Yep.
The debate back and forth with evidence. Then kind of a closing argument type thing of, hey, this is sort of where I am. This is where I think I might go. Kind of wrap it up, kind of thing.
Yep.
And then have Chris sort of do.
You're the jury. You decide because
you
decide for yourself, right? No, you don't decide which of us won. You decide for yourself what you want to do.
Look, don't get me wrong. I have opinions on TypeScript and JavaScript, and they're not.
No.
They're not what most people think. In fact, most people are like, well, you're crazy. TypeScript is awesome. What's the matter with you? But to be fair, I haven't tried to do anything with it. I haven't been in a project and said, okay, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to find out if later I'm happy.
So one thing I was trying to look for, and I didn't spend enough time. I really like to see, and I don't know if it's out there, but it would be good to get a good perspective of how many web developers are using TypeScript. I know in the thing they talk about Angular, it's we polled our Angular people and they're all using TypeScript. That's like polling all .NET developers are using C#. I don't think it's the right thing. And the reason why I bring it up is that's part of my concerns is the longevity of it. And is this going to evolve into the next X for Microsoft that gets dropped in 2 years?
Yeah. Well, put that in your... That's the thing.
I already have it. I have a bunch of notes. I got to decide if I'm going to just give it to you all raw or whatever.
It's okay if they're raw, because I can group them into questions.
And I was trying to find Douglas Crawford stuff that was, because you said you found something different with him, and I found one other thing that was recent, but it was someone summarizing his thing about ECMA 6.6 in classes.
Yeah.
So that was the only thing I found.
Basically, a few years ago, and what he was talking about adding features to the language, and specifically, and I'm telling you, this was almost a throwaway, right? Yeah. But he had said he believed that certain new features didn't need to be added to the language because transpilers were clearly capable of addressing them.
Yep.
And then he went on to say this about TypeScript. He said the resulting JavaScript that TypeScript produces is very good idiomatic JavaScript. You could learn a lot about writing great idiomatic JavaScript, this was what he said a few years ago, by just transpiling some TypeScript. Yep. But he still felt in the end, I don't want those features added to the language because we can see that there are other ways to get there.
Yep.
And he didn't necessarily, he felt like, why should we steer JavaScript to being an object-oriented language when it isn't? And if you want it to be object-oriented, then go use this other thing.
Yeah. I had a great quote from Anders from Connect. He said, "You need something in between the code you write and the code that runs." And he wasn't even specifically talking about TypeScript. He was just saying that generally. I mean, he was talking, about it was in the context of web development and languages like that. But it was a broader discussion. This was the panel of the future of software development. And so that panel, that topic kind of ranged all over the place. Like they're talking about IoT and R and everything. And so he did really intend it to be more of a general observation, like in any language. But I think he was giving the example of TypeScript in web development. But that was his quote. I had to write it down. You need something in between the code you write and the code that runs. And I mean, need is a pretty strong phrase. I'm not even sure I completely agree with that, but that's that seemed to.
That is the problem that TypeScript's trying to solve, though. Well, it's one of the problems. It's also adding type, which is.
You're going to do the noise reduction and leveling, right?
Yeah. If you record once we stop talking, if you just record the room noise, that'll help.
I've already stopped recording, so I'm just going to.
Yeah, stop recording, send that over. But when we're done talking, just record your quiet room, your silent room for 30 seconds or whatever, and send that over as a separate clip.
Okay.
I didn't do that last time? I did that last time.
I don't know. I think Chris did. I'm not sure.
I didn't. But I had already noise reduced before you said not to.
Whatever. Go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it. Just, reduce yours. Yeah, I mean, you know how to do it, right, Todd?
Yeah. I did last time, but I undid it, so.
Yeah, no, go ahead and do it, I guess. Todd, for yours last time, the way that we were doing, Chris and I talked for like a good 2 minutes in the beginning, and so you had like a silent in the beginning of your actual recording. You had like 2 minutes of silence, so I just took all of that, and that was my quiet room. Yeah, go ahead and do that, and then send me the noise reduced version, and then we can do this. All right.
I'm a little concerned that I'm a little quiet. Like I was looking at where I was peaking, and it wasn't like the last episode, which.
No,
when I listened to the package manager episode, I was like, it was the first time that I said, "Oh my gosh, it all came together."
Yeah.
It sounded.
Don't worry about that, because I normalize and compress all at the same time. So I normalize everybody together.
That was the first episode, honestly, where I'm telling you, like, you know how I've said I've done it is I've listened to a little bit in speaker and then I put headphones in.
Yeah.
And it was like a pleasure to listen to all the way through to the end.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, Jess, must have taken him hours.
It did. Yeah, I went through and I actually have some edits outstanding. I have another cut that I want to do of that. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to do it, but
it's like that was all Halo 5 time that you didn't get in.
I know. So I realized I just kind of threw it out after the fact, asking one of you guys to do the show notes, but maybe that can be the division of labor. If I do the editing, which I'm perfectly happy to do, one of you or either of you, both of you can do the show notes.
Yeah, I was able to log in and add to it, so I can do that.
I'm done editing, and I just want to get it out there live, but I'm like, I gotta write something up.
But if you throw I threw my text file in the Google Drive.
Yeah.
And if you do the same thing, then that's something I can put a little time into the next couple of days, because it seems like you spend a few days kind of getting it ready, and then there's a delay before publication.
Yeah, well, no, what I've been doing is I freaking stay up until 3:30 the night that we record, but I got to stop doing that. That's not working out very well. But I just get so excited to get it out, and I do all the editing, and then I'm afraid to actually publish it because it's 3:30 in the morning, and I know I screwed something up, so. Then I just put it to bed and check it at the next time, and then I may as well have just worked on it the next night anyway. But what I've been doing over the past couple, certainly the last one and maybe the last two, is get a rough cut out onto Dropbox or something that we can all start reviewing and listening to.
Yeah.
And then get feedback or what. If there's anything really atrocious or really bad that needs to be cut out, you guys can let me know. But then that's what I listen to going to work and. All at work the next day, and just listening for horrible things and just kind of taking notes or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I did too. I went and stuck my headphones in and said, okay, I'll listen to this.
Yeah, just no editing, just 5 minutes of stitching it together. Well, no, I mean I do it while I'm working. I just have it on.
Yeah.
While I'm walking to go get breakfast, while I'm working.
I don't have that time. I need to make that time.
You don't eat breakfast or work?
Well, the measure of my day is, and this is being very serious. Measure of my day is I write 3 or 4. I use the getting things done approach. I write 3 things down I need to accomplish that day. If I get any of them done or start it, that's a good day. Most times things
That's
just
the getting stuff done approach.
Things just all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I need to do this. Wait a minute, this was not on my list of things to do, but now it's a higher priority. So now I need to switch what I'm doing here. Ugh. Because we have to keep track of our time. There are days I literally have like 1 hour doing 8 different things. And it's just like, there's just not an efficient way to do this.
Yeah. So I am gone this week. So I actually have off on Wednesday. I'm home on Wednesday, but I'm home with the kids. But so that means Tuesday night, which would, I guess, be tomorrow night for those of us who have gone over the midnight barrier here.
That's
Tuesday night.
You were thinking of trying to record Tuesday?
Yes. Can we do that? Can you guys do that? Can we do TypeScript?
Tuesday instead of Sunday or Tuesday and Sunday?
Sunday, I should be home. I'm definitely not going to be home on Saturday. I'm going to be away through Saturday. I'm pretty sure I'll be home on Sunday. I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. Or we could do
I'm fine with recording. Huh? Yeah, if we record Tuesday, I'd want to skip Sunday and then do the following Sunday. Yeah, Tuesday was the day I was thinking of too.
Well, I'm trying to get 2 in a week here.
I know.
I'm okay with pushing Sunday out, but if we could push it out to like Wednesday or whatever.
Yeah, I have to see. A lot's going on. No, I'm definitely fine with doing Tuesday, doing TypeScript.
Okay.
Is that enough time for Chris to get his questions together?
Well,
Yeah.
I need your documentation.
Right, as long as we do it like now.
Or are we just going to put it into thing here?
Throw it onto Google Drive or OneNote.
Yeah, we'll throw it in OneNote. Yeah. It's all in my head. I just got to sit down and write it out. So.
What?
All of my notes are in my head. I just have to write it out.
And then I'll turn it into something.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm going to create a new page on here for episodes called TypeScript.
It's not on there?
No, I didn't see it.
Oh.
It listed 18 times in the list of future topics.
That's crazy. Okay, yeah, and then you just do your Todd section. I'll put it in my Jeff section, and then Chris can turn it into the good section. All right, awesome. Are we good? Anything more to talk about?
I don't think so.
My file's up.
Cool. Todd, your file's up?
Not yet. I'm going to do the noise reduction thing once we get off. It'll be up shortly.
What, Dropbox? Google Drive? Where are we doing?
Google Drive. It'll be in Google Drive.
Yeah, and I saved the original project, so if for some reason you need it recut, let me know.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm trying to figure out what my data recovery plan is. Like, how long do I keep this stuff? Right now, I'm just keeping it on my. I've got a RAID drive in my big beefy desktop, so I'm just keeping it there. I've got plenty of space. It's RAID 1, so it's pretty safe, but I'm not doing anything else with it. It's not in the cloud anywhere.
So I had a quick question for you, Jess. It's a TypeScript question.
Sure.
What version of TypeScript are you using?
Oh, I don't know.
Keep up to date, or
1.3, 1.4. Not really. Like kind of. In the middle.
Because how do I bring up tools? Because there's one thing that we had mentioned that I thought was interesting. But Andres mentioned it. He mentioned 1.7 having async stuff. And I was curious if that got compiled into. That could become a promise or something in JavaScript. Yeah. He was using it with Node.
Yeah.
Which obviously, if you're using Node, you can use whatever freaking version of JavaScript probably you want, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see that. I got to check that out. But things like
when you watch his thing, because he mentions it at one point, he goes, "In TypeScript 1.7, we've added async await," and he's actually doing Node work in code.
What?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's based on the ES. Well, it's not called ES7, but it's based on the async await that's probably going to go into JavaScript.
Yeah.
Basically, the TypeScript folks are they're like, just use the C# syntax, and it's gaining a lot of mind share.
Yeah. I mean, the TypeScript video that I did and that I will continue to do, the TypeScript talk that I do, is basically it's TypeScript 1.0, right? And it's a fraction of TypeScript 1.0 because it's focused on this is the stuff that you actually need day to day. Async await would be one of those things that I would add to that list, but most of that stuff, almost by definition, in like 1.2 and later, is all like additional stuff that's cool. They're great features, but like you don't need to know it in order to truly understand TypeScript. Like things like JSX support. Who freaking cares, right? Like,
yeah, right.
It just does not affect me. And so when you ask me, am I using
practical things?
But yeah,
like,
in the end,
does it actually
becomes
solve problems I have with multi-threading and other things in JavaScript?
There's no multi-threading.
Yeah,
in the end, it all
JavaScript.
Timeout.
Yep.
Well, there's web
promises become set timeout. Async is going to be set timeout. Generators are set timeout. It's just better syntax than the Pyramid of Doom.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, but set timeouts are evil. Pyramid of Doom. That's a good definition.
That's what it is. When you this promise if then callback. It's terrible. That's all it is.
That's the world I live in, man. 90% of what I code I write now are JavaScript.
Well, if you don't have very good coding,
there's nothing wrong with JavaScript.
It becomes.
It's the callback hell that's impossible to follow later. That's why they came up with generators. Yeah. And then async await is just cleaner syntax over generators.
Yeah, sure. If you don't have good coding standards to get away from that kind of code.
But TypeScript supports this, so you use TypeScript, so you're already getting the benefit.
I sure am.
I mean,
yeah. I was just curious what it compiled down to, and I want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I have not. I had seen like the initial bubblings of that a couple months ago, and I thought it was a great idea. But what the initial response I heard back then was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea at some point, but apparently it was a lot more serious than I thought. Or the project just moves faster than I expected.
Wow.
Yeah, but when you ask me like what version of TypeScript are you on, I'm on effectively 1.0, right? Like that's what I use. Like the fact that we have 1.5 or whatever installed on our machines is practically irrelevant because we're not using any of the features that came out in 1.5, or maybe we'll be using one here or there. There was one not in.
That's going to be one of my questions. Who's going to be is why aren't you keeping up to date? Like what will be your driver and not driver to do that?
Well, the feature that comes out in
Visual
that new
Studio updates too, right? Like, have you bothered to update Visual Studio with the latest TypeScript? If the answer is no, then you're not keeping up. But you're probably
it's more about it's more about the idea that it comes down to the idea of if you're going to use TypeScript, are you keeping in sync what's coming out? Is it coming out too fast? Like what is I'm trying to think of what people would outside people who I tell people to use TypeScript.
Yeah, right.
These are the kind of questions they're going to ask.
Is it revving so quickly that I have to keep up? Yeah, I know what you mean.
Or what is the point where I need to? Because ultimately the biggest challenge is people they never upgrade.
Sure.
All of a sudden they're behind. So I don't know. It was just more of a curious question because I saw it. I'm like, interesting. Because those are the things I think ultimately would add adoption of it more. Is the idea that you have these higher level things or concepts.
Yep.
All right. My notes are up there, Chris. They're kind of all over the place. I think you'll get my viewpoint, which Jess already knows.
Oh, yeah.
But the funny thing is, at this point, it's almost like I'm just being
argumentative.
Anti-JavaScript.
I know. Just on principle because you're not willing to admit that TypeScript's awesome. At this point, I
haven't used it enough yet.
At this point, you just can't admit that you're wrong. I know. It's fine.
Oh, believe me. I will gladly admit when I'm wrong. I have no problem with that. It's just you're drinking way too much of the Kool-Aid.
I'm going to stop broadcasting for a second.
You have the IV built into your Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.